This is The Bagel Report, a podcast exploring Jewish representation and identity in popular culture, with your hosts Esther Kostanowitz and Erin Ben Moshe, and now a production of J, the Jewish News of Northern California. Hey, Erin.
Esther, how are you?
We're back from all our various places.
We are. We were around the world and back. Well, you were anyway.
I was, yeah. I went on a little bit of a journey out of Egypt and into Italy and Israel, and then back out of Israel, and then into New York for like 2 hours, and then back to LA. And I'm excited to be back to talk about pop culture with you, and especially our main subject today, which is one that I know is near and dear to your heart, which we'll be tackling, which is the marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Yes. It's funny. I record in this like office room every week with you. And the last couple of weeks, it's been a very messy space because I was hosting my entire family. So when you left, everybody came to me, and that same family who I love very much, they're asking, okay, when are we going to get a Maisel episode?
The truth is that there's a lot more people than just your family and just you have been waiting for this season of television.
Really?
Obviously.
More than us?
Well, maybe not more, but in addition to you, other people have been waiting. And I think, this was such a groundbreaking show that really kind of started at the beginning of the whole streaming thing, when really helped put Amazon Prime, now Prime Video, on the map, and also became the center of so many conversations about Jews on TV and Jews who are played by non-Jews on TV, and how TV is going even more Jewy with every possible passing minute. And so I think that this is really one of those central shows that I think people are going to be talking about for a while. I think it got like over 200 Emmy and nominations over the course of its 5 seasons. So 4 seasons, actually, because the 5th is just coming out, and that's what we're talking about. But yeah, it's done a lot. So we're going to give it its due in this episode, and probably in 1 or 2 future episodes as well.
Yes, but before we get to it, we have some newy and Jewy things we'd like to share with you.
That's right, because it is a Maisel world, but it's not a totally Maisel world. There are other things that happen too. Yeah. So some of you may remember the episode that we did where we interviewed Todd Shotz, who is a friend of ours and was the conduit for the opportunity where Erin and I got to be background actors in the famously reviled and over-discussed You People. However, we can report that the synagogue scene that Todd consulted on was actually very good and very accurate. And so Todd also spoke in that episode about having consulted on Grey's Anatomy, and that episode aired April 13th, and it is very Jewy. It tells the story of a patient who has his bar mitzvah in the hospital. And if you want to hear more about Todd's experiences being a Jewish consultant and you haven't listened to our interview with him, that's what you should do next.
Yeah, he was very excited about it many moons ago, and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it's finally here.
Yeah, it's true. I'm thrilled for him. He had a great time. And he looks great. He was even on camera for a couple of minutes. It was great to see him up there. And moving on, we've got a story about Zach Braff, who many, many people know from Scrubs. But what you may not know is that he actually grew up in a hybrid Orthodox and secular environment. He is Jewish. And so, he had both of those influences in his house. And one of the things that, I read one of his brothers was a novelist, and so he wrote a book years ago talking about that kind of Orthodox Jewish environment that he grew up in. But in advance of the release of his new movie, A Good Person, which when we hear a good person, we also think about Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, about being a good person. But this is a movie with Florence Pugh and Morgan Freeman, and it's about a car accident. Anyway, the point is, I'm sure we'll over-discuss A Good Person if we ever see it. We'll talk about repentance and, forgiveness and all of those good things. But the reason we're bringing this story to you here is because he was on Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend, which is Conan's cool interview podcast. And Zach Braff got extremely Jewy, especially in the first 10 minutes or so, talking about his upbringing. And although we don't know there's Jewish content in the film, it does center heavily on grief. So if there's a Shiva or Kaddish or something in there, I'm not going to be totally surprised.
And we love to see it. Not the grief, but the presentation of grief, especially Jewish grief on screen, because it pops up here and there, especially now, which is kind of cool to see. I don't know if you've caught this, Esther, but I guess Netflix is doing a lot more plugging of This Is Where I Leave You on Netflix. And that is the Shiva. It's based on a book that was very Jewish, and the movie is not so Jewish, but it centers on a Shiva and a family who needs to come together and kind of mourn the patriarch of the family. And people are talking about it so much now. And I'm like, this movie's been out for years. I'm not sure why we're talking about it now, but I think they're doing like an extra push on Netflix.
No, they are.
So that's been kind of cool.
It worked on me. I watched it again.
Me too.
I actually really loved the book. The book was a really fascinating and well-written exploration of what it's like to be trapped in a house with people you don't want to be trapped in a house with, I guess. Now everything is going to be Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. But no, the truth is that's why Shiva is such an important and such an attractive construct for family drama and comedy, is because you are compressed into a space that maybe you haven't been in a while with people you might not choose to be so close to physically during a time of grief and loss. But I think that we can totally do an episode on that in the future if we want, or we can, we've been talking for a while about doing a grief episode, and certainly there are enough Shivas and Kaddishes and funeral scenes. So we'll start our compiling fairly soon, and we can move forward on that. But yes, I think that Netflix has really resurrected interest in that movie, and that's interesting. I don't know why it's happening, but it is interesting.
We're here for it. And while we put that grief away, it's time to unpack new grief, because now we are entering the final season of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And some people may be grieving that.
It is really true. Like I said before, as we've been talking about this series, we realize how much of our pop culture consciousness is occupied by talking about Maisel, waiting for Maisel, debating what's happening on screen and off. And of course, Amy Sherman Palladino being the showrunner has been very influential in our pop culture conception in the past. So here we are, and we're ready to talk about it in just a minute. But before we officially get started, I want to tell you that, and this is new to you, Erin, I refuse to tell you the story in advance of this episode. So I was on the plane from Israel to Los Angeles. I was going via New York. So technically this leg of the trip was Tel Aviv to New York. And I was sitting next to somebody who I had struck up a conversation with at some point before we took off. And then when we took off, we were in the air. It's like obviously like a long flight. It's like 12 and a half hours, something like that. So at some point, I don't know exactly, I think I had recommended something to her to watch, like as we took off. And it wasn't something I had seen, but, it was something I'd heard a lot of buzz about, this show Beef. I don't know if you saw any of it.
Mm-hmm.
But so I guess she thought I might be interested in TV or something like that, but we didn't really trade much information. And then she turned to me and she said, "Did you ever see The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel?" I'm like, "Yeah, a little."
No, tell me more. What is this show?
I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "I'm really upset when I see it TV portraying Jews and the actors who are playing the Jews aren't Jewish."
You're like, really?
I was like, that is the first time I'm hearing that. No, that is totally new information. No, I said, yeah, actually, that's a big topic of conversation. She goes, really? And I was like, yeah, a lot of people talk about this all the time. And it is one of the things. Please tell me
you told her to not watch Beef anymore and to just listen to our podcast.
Right. Well, I didn't come right out with it, but I did talk a little bit more about this in context and, try to explain why Jewish characters don't only have to be played by Jews, but, should sometimes be played by Jews and maybe even often played by Jews. And that, just, a bunch of the regular stuff about how a Jewish character played by a Jew can have an additional layer of meaning, et cetera. And then she's like, wow. like, you know a lot about this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you happen to like fall into the one category of thing that I happen to have a very deep bench of knowledge about. And then I told her I was a writer, and she goes, well, now I'm embarrassed. I didn't know I was talking to somebody who writes about this stuff. And I was like, no, it's cool. Like I'm a pop culture consumer like everybody else. I put on my pop culture one streaming channel at a time, as they say. And, it was just really funny to be next to a person who was like kind of organically wanted to talk about The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which also proves just how integrated it is into the pop culture sphere. So yes, with that as the intro.
I just want to say I love that story. I love that you told me. And this is literally something I tell people all the time. If I am on a plane and someone says, we need a doctor, I'm looking around. I'm looking for the doctor. But if someone comes on a plane and says, quick, has anyone seen The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel? I stand up. I'm the guy, or I'm the person. I can do this. So the fact that that actually happened to you, it's truly, I'm so happy for you.
And before we dive into the new episodes, we've got 4 now available on Prime Video. We just wanted to share some highlights that are helpful to remember as we go into season 5.
So basically, the entire season, Midge decides she's going to play everything by her own rules, and she's only going to perform at a burlesque theater. Okay. Joel loses a bunch of money. His bar is kind of successful, kind of not, whatever. He is hanging out with May, who we really love, rock star Stephanie Shu, and she reveals that she's pregnant. And when Joel tells his lovely family, i.e. Moish, that they're having a baby, he has a heart attack, sending everybody to the hospital. Meanwhile, Susie is growing her business with Dinah, and Dinah introduces Susie to James, who is a Black comedian / actor who's going to now join the roster of Susie Meyer and Associates. We meet Gordon Ford, who's like a Johnny Carson, Jack Parr style character who's going to be important, maybe, probably. Who's to say?
Who is to say? We are to say. We are saying.
We are to say.
But who is
going to
be
very important?
Right.
Yes. And during all of this nonsense, Lenny and Midge, Lenny Bruce and Midge, I can't call him Lenny Bruce and Midge, they hook up and they hang out and they have like a really good thing going. But, she's like, hey, promise me that like I'm always going to be funny. Like you're always going to see me as like a comedian, not just like some girl you hooked up with. And he's like, will do. And then you also get some like tinklings, tricklings of, oh, maybe Lenny's not okay. And then Rose, she declares that she is going to war with these matchmaker mobsters. And that's stressful because I don't think Rose knows what she's up against, but we'll see. And then finally, after an entire season where you're like, what the hell is going on? Lenny Bruce kind of shakes Midge and just goes, if you blow this, you're going to break my heart. Please don't mess this up. And this is while they're at Carnegie Hall, while Lenny Bruce is doing like this amazing sold out show. And she's like, how did you do this? And he's like, you can do this. Just stop messing up. And she ends up walking aimlessly in the snow and she sees a go forward sign and it ends up just being a Gordon Ford sign, which Esther, you point out is very crazy ex-girlfriend energy. Right. And maybe we just need to start looking up at billboards and finding inspiration from whatever we see.
Right. I feel like I should take out my contact lenses and start looking at billboards for messages. Because then when you focus and come and you realize it actually says something else, you're like, oh, I had a vision in which the letters reshaped to give me a message for my future. And I'm now operating on all messages that come through billboards.
Yes. So season 5, episode 1 is called
Go Forward. And it is a callback to that sign, that Gordon Ford sign that Midge saw and took it as an imperative to go forward. And in some ways, the actual episode is following its own title advice because the first 5 minutes of this episode are set in Cambridge in 1981 and in a therapist's office. And there we find a character who seems very familiar to us, and especially the way the opening minutes are shot. We look and we think it's Midge because she's midgy. She's very midgy. But it's 1981, which is like 20 years after the period that we've been looking at during The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And what is revealed is that this is therapy that is being attended by Esther Maisel, my namesake. Well, she's not my
Swear
namesake.
to God, I thought you were
like,
going to say Esther Costanowitz, and it was really confusing to me when you said Esther Maisel.
Right. Well, maybe we'll do a sidebar at some other point about the Esthers I'm keeping track of in popular culture, because that's a real list that I have next to my computer.
I love it.
We didn't have Esthers on TV or in movies when I was growing up. So Esther Maisel is in therapy, and we get an inside look at how her mind works. It is Midge manic plus Abe brilliant. And her brain is kind of like a hyperactive Gilmore brain, and that it moves fast. And if you're not used to the pacing of it, or how she sometimes starts sentences but doesn't finish them, then you get lost. And this is something that the therapist remarks upon as well. And the casting was excellent.
It really was fantastic casting. Several people have we've talked about it and we can't believe how good it is. And it feels like after, several years, people are watching this show and they are trying to completely embody Midge and what her offspring would act like. And I think they hit the nail on the head. And my parents are so funny because my mom can't believe how good it was. And my dad's like, it's acting. It's acting. They're just good actors. But truly, she is amazing. And she is Alexandria Socha, not clear. But she is Jewish, and she was like a Broadway darling. She replaced Leah Michelle in Spring Awakening, and she also married a nice Jewish actor, Itai Benson. And it's interesting that after all that time and all that dialogue amongst the community of who is Jewish and who can play Jewish, that this time around, the person who's growing up to play this neurotic Jewish, brilliant, hyperactive mind is played by a Jewish person.
Right. It's really interesting to see, first of all, that the kids are mostly all right, even if they may be very screwed up. In episode 3, we want to just shoot ahead to tell you that don't worry, you Ethan fans, you will get adult Ethan in episode 3. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. That Ethan as an adult is played by Ben Rosenfield, who is also Jewish. And I don't know for sure that the fact that both of these characters were cast using Jewish actors is a response to all of the conversation that has been about non-Jews playing Jews, especially in this series. But let's call it a little bit of a corrective in a certain way.
It's also a great shakeup to the season. We've never seen something like this where we've always been in the time frame the show is set in. And so the fact that we're jumping to 1981, we are seeing adult Esther. And in this episode, we do see Esther at an age where she's talking and interacting. She's not just where's Esther? She's just this baby.
Where's Esther?
It's an interesting... it is an interesting juxtaposition of what we've seen so far. And it makes me feel like this is the end. Last season was a slow burn and there is momentum here. You either have to get on or get off. And it's kind of exciting to watch. This episode has so much movement. There is so much to get through. There is so much that we need to catch up on because after this scene, 1981, it cuts back to 1961 and she's in bed. Midge is in bed and Susie is on the way to her house trying to wake her up from this weird trance that she's in because she just aimlessly walked home in the snow and freezing cold.
Right. Is it a fever? Is it a half coma? Is she in shock? We don't really know medically what's going on. And I think I would have to employ a medical professional to assess what actually happened to her. Why didn't she take a cab home? Why didn't she take the subway home? These are unanswered questions. I have no idea.
But you know what? Now that I'm thinking about this, it makes me think that we are seeing anytime Midge walks delusionally through the city, something big is happening. The first time she did this was on Kol Nidre, which is the night before Yom Kippur, but clearly no one is doing Kol Nidre. 5 years ago when she's going to the Gaslight drunk to do her first unofficial set, right? She walked all the way down. And this time she's walking all the way back home delusional. Like, this feels like, okay, something's going to happen here, you know? Why else would she walk?
Well, I mean, I guess a long walk could always, maybe we're just still in Passover brain, but could be an exodus, could be a wandering followed by a redemption. That could work.
Even though it's very existential, it's so slapstick that like her own parents do not know what to do with this child and who is a full-on adult. And so they're asking Susie, who truly only understands Midge, to come and save the day, which she does.
The whole illness in bed and the things she's muttering and Susie's back and forth with Abe and Rose. Abe and Rose's banter over the course of the first couple of episodes also very heightened and unrealistic, I think. But I know that they're making a point about the incidents of season 5 just intensifying until there's a point where people are making changes in their lives. And I get it. I think that the parents on both sides just go for it, just all out in terms of the how they react to each other and to the world around them. Shirley, who's Joel's mother, gives a little bit of helpful advice, which is never wave a baby over a stove unless you're trying to potty train them, which I think is she just tosses it out there as if it's something that everybody knows. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Never wave a baby over a stove unless you're trying to potty train them. That famous phrase, right?
I love it. I love it too, because it's sorry to interrupt, but there's it just shows how different these two parents are, right? I don't even know how Rose and Abe raised children, because they seem like people who do not know what to do in the face of children ever. And then you have Shirley and Moish, who literally are the very hands-on parents. It's you're in the family business. How many types of tuna fish sandwiches or peanut butter jelly sandwiches do you want? I know my kid. I know what I need so much so that she has backup pajamas in the closet, because you never know when you're going to need them. These are two very different types of parents and both extremes of themselves.
Yeah. And I think Abe's response to Midge's crazed, dreaming word fragments is that she could be speaking bebop, which is a 1940s jazz. But we'll get to more later about maybe how Abe is not the best father or grandfather. He is a particular type and he is very entertaining to watch. But would you actually want him to be your grandfather? I'm not sure. Or your father.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of, obviously we could go through each episode in detail, but we want to just pull out some of the themes and some of the lines that we think are really funny or interesting. And one of the great scenes that we knew we were going to love as soon as we saw the Trippy 60s airport is Midge's reunion with Lenny Bruce.
She has a run-in with Lenny Bruce, and it's beautiful and sad. And you think maybe this is the last time they're ever going to see each other, which is also kind of heartbreaking. And as they're walking down this tunnel to meet each other, there's this song in the background, which was Till There Was You. And it's beautiful. And it's very oh, this must be their song, I guess. And something I noticed is that in the first few notes of Till There Was You also sounds like the first few notes of the Lenny Bruce song All Alone that he sings a couple seasons back. So that kind of is a weird juxtaposition. And I don't know if that's intentional or accidental.
That's a deep musical cut from you, Erin.
I heard it and I was oh, this can't be on purpose, but also it probably isn't an accident. I don't know. It was a great moment, and there are great details in that episode that matter later on. And it just shows how brilliant the writing is of this, where they're making callbacks to things from seasons past. He's going to see his daughter, and we learn about his daughter, I think last season, after so many times knowing each other, how the boundaries have changed between Lenny Bruce and Midge. And it just feels like a farewell almost. And
yeah,
when at the very end of this exchange, as he's going off to the West Coast, which is also upsetting because that's ultimately in real life where Lenny Bruce dies. He dies in California. She says, like, I'm going to make it. Something along the lines of, like, this is going to be different. I'm going to make it this time, as like a promise. And it kind of feels like what Aaron Sorkin did when Joshua Malina's character came into the West Wing. There was an exchange between the characters that essentially let the audience know that he's one of us. Like, you can trust this character to replace Rob Lowe. There was like a little Post-it note that literally said, he's one of us. And it wasn't so much for the characters, it was for the audience. And so I think Midge saying, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to do it. You're not going to be disappointed in me. I think, yes, it was to reassure him, but I think it's to reassure the audience to know this is it. This is the final season. She might make some mistakes along the way, but like, she is gonna get there by the end of this series. And I feel like they have to establish that in the first episode. Otherwise, no one's gonna stick around.
Yeah, I'll say yes. And one of the things that we learn in the first episode, in the opening minutes, when we're meeting Esther Maisel as a grown-up and as a PhD student who is like super genius at like physics and maybe curing some sort of cancer or something while she's sitting in therapy and not answering her therapist's questions fully, is that her mother has become a huge success. And so we know that she did make it. And so in some ways, this, this magic moment in the airport, I love an airport for its symbolism of paths diverging and reuniting. So far, until season 5, we had a chronologically progressive narrative. Now we are in episode 1, which is go forward. And we literally shot forward by 2 decades. And we see that success has been achieved and that it is still very much at the expense of the Maisel children, which is something we thought would be happening based on her treatment of her kids in the past. I think that it might have landed better if we didn't know that Midge makes it big.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice because also as we move into episode 2, and we might jump in and out because all 3 of the episodes were released together. And so we might be jumping in and out, merging the episodes as we call back on things. But as we go into the second episode, we do get another time jump, and it is in the face of 60 Minutes. They're doing a 60 Minutes episode on Midge Maisel. I don't want to spoil everything that happens because I do think it's a really interesting collage of her life. And it really does feel like something you'd be watching now. Like, oh, wow, she is so famous that like they're looking through her life in past tense. But I do like it because it gives this like push and pull, because now we know she makes it. So now we have to see how she gets there. And I like being able to jump back and forth and see the ramifications and maybe even see like the seeds being planted now in the 60s where the show has been grounded, and then go to like the 80s or the 90s or the 70s even. Like it's a fun way to kind of jump through life and see who is still a part of Midge's.
Right. And I think also one of the interesting things is we are reminded how much PR and media have changed because, 60 Minutes is still around, it's just crazy. Debuted in 1968. And, obviously there have been a number of people who have cycled through in the interviewer's chair. Mike Wallace, who is the reporter who's depicted in this montage, was at 60 Minutes from 1968 to 2006, meaning that if Midge had been, popular in the 1970s, it's very likely she would have been interviewed by Mike Wallace. So that's a nice little touch in there. But the way she is in this interview, I did not find it likable. I don't know if that... Yeah, it was very mean and negative, and the energy had really shifted around her. And this is where we find out that she's had a break with Susie, what they call it, a 25-year friendship that went bust. And Midge, she doesn't really address it. She talks more about the fact that she does everything for the children, which is, kind of hilarious considering what she did for her own children or to her own children.
Yeah. It's a very strange thing, time jumping and seeing her age and seeing who she is as she ages. Because one thing I like is the way that they age her and it feels realistic. Like, Midge is not someone who is just going to suddenly, I don't know, like she's not just going to suddenly change with the times. She is kind of evolving a little bit, but it's very, like, she does stay true to what she was. I do want to, I know we're jumping now because now we're in episode 2, but I do want to take a minute and talk about your favorite person in the world, Mr. Joel Maisel, because he is going through it already this season. It's 2 episodes in. He is not doing well, and it shows, right? Like, he and May break up. May no longer pregnant, and they never actually say that it's an abortion, which I think is great. I think it's very brilliant how they talk about it without talking about it. And he is upset. He's sad. He didn't have a say in it. Here is now another strong woman leaving him. I mean, the first time he kind of left, but it's a very interesting moment, which ultimately results in him freaking out and having a meltdown at the bar where he gets beaten up.
Yeah.
By his own stupidity.
Yeah, he gets beaten up by his own stupidity is right. It's a good thing to own a bar where you can go and get messed up, but he actually pre-games at another bar.
Yes.
Probably because he knows that at his own bar, he wouldn't be allowed to do that. So he comes in completely already bombed and deciding that that's not enough. He decides to get on stage and do his turnabout is fair play, stand up about Midge. And that's why he got into this in the first place and it starts with verbal violence and then ends with physical violence. And he starts off kind of charismatic, actually, and then it all turns wrong. And even somebody like me who's not a super fan of Joel's has a little rahmanis, a little bit of pity or mercy on him. We know that the right Maisel is in show business.
Yes.
But he also does not necessarily deserve what he gets, but he also, in a way, does because he provokes it so that he'll feel as bad on the outside as he does on the inside. That seems clear.
Yes. And the difference between Midge and Joel is that when Joel does comedy, he doesn't know how to talk about himself. And when he does, he ends up hurting people. Midge, she talks about her life. And, when she's kind of attacking someone, she is doing it in an observational way. And sometimes she does get in trouble. So, okay, there is another thing I do want to say about Stephanie Shu. Amy Sherman-Palladino was talking about the departure of this character because she leaves to go to Chicago to be a doctor. And she says some women can't have it all. And Amy Sherman-Palladino was saying how she's a brilliant actor, stole every scene she was in. And May's character, even though similar to Midge, both strong women, she's supposed to represent this next generation who are building on what Midge is doing, right? Like, Midge had the baby and then all of a sudden and got married and did the whole thing and then had a dream. And May is representing all the women who are coming up in the 60s who have a dream, have goals, and then want to accomplish that before they get married, before they have kids, who want to think for themselves and just go and do those things. And so it's exciting to kind of see those two types of women diverge, and then also see Joel be attracted and interested in that and not really sure how to handle it.
Yeah, no, that's an important point to make. And I think, so in 1961, abortion was not legal. In 1964, the Association for the Study of Abortion advocated for medically necessary abortions, but up until there was no real pathway for abortions in New York in early 1960s. So, but by the late 1960s, there was a nationwide effort to reform abortion laws in most states. And between 1967 and 1973, New York was one of 4 states that repealed their abortion bans entirely. So I think that, it was very surprising to Joel because it was not something that he ever thought would happen to any of the women that he was with.
But I will say that when Midge and Shirley and Moish, when they all find out, they are shocked, but it's not like they don't know what it is. And I think that's also
so?
Yes.
I mean, I think Midge understands, but I'm not sure that Shirley and Moish know that that's what it is. They say she lost it.
I think Shirley thinks she lost the baby, but I think Moish knows. I think he knows what it is. I don't think they agree with it, but I think ultimately they feel bad for Joel because it was out of his control. But to me, it feels like some of them know that the abortion exists. And to me, that's really fascinating because it's like, yes, it's a pre-Roe world, but abortion still existed, even though it was illegal. And some of the reactions show that there is a knowledge that abortion exists and sometimes it happens. That you don't just always lose the baby in a miscarriage. And I thought that subtext was very fascinating to kind of brush on and then move away from it very quickly for this show.
Right. Because that's not what the show is about.
Right.
If the show were about that, we could have had Midge get knocked up and then have a conversation about that. But because this happens peripherally and because it was such a something that people didn't talk about back then, I think this is in some ways the right way to handle that. And I miss Stephanie Shu too, because this was the first role that I really saw her in. And now she's in a ton of stuff and she's excellent in all of those things. And it's really kind of fun to have this be like the start of her career. But I think there's a lot of other things that I think we need to talk about in this episode and then in episode 3. So let's get it on.
Okay, so Zelda has a boyfriend, and in pure Weissman fashion, no one understands, no one gets it, no one knows. Even though he's literally in the house all the time, Ethan and Esther have a relationship with this man, and it's just so annoying how oblivious they are to Zelda and her happiness. And I also love that for as oblivious as Midge is and how Abe and Rose are equally right there to jump at her and say, you're so selfish. You don't know anything. She is a product of her parents who also don't get it. And it's just a lovely mirror. They're holding each other up and it's awful.
Yeah, I would say also, this is something I shared with you, is that it's not good for the Jews how utterly privileged they are. They're oblivious to the people who work in their home and are taking care of their children and taking care of everything so that they can live a nice life. They don't even do the upkeep, but it's Zelda and Janusz who are there doing their thing and making sure that there's stability for their grandchildren. And it's one of those things where you're like, I look at these characters and I think, how do you deal with your privilege when you are wealthy and you have the money to hire folks to help you? To what extent do they become family members or are they the hired help? And I think that line has been really blurry in the case of Zelda and Janusz, because, Zelda's been there really since the beginning and is so important to their family, but yet they don't even notice that she is a person.
And it's interesting? In the beginning, you see them cooking. I was just rewatching season 1 and Midge knows how to cook, right? She knows how to take care of herself. But now Zelda is stepping in to be this actual parent role because everybody is so busy that they are forgetting completely about the children that they needed to raise. So watching the progression of how important Zelda actually becomes in this show is really fascinating when talking about, the privilege. And we're learning about Zelda and we're learning about Midge and all these, and this next tidbit because she gets a job writing for Gordon Ford, which is ultimately what we're building towards. It's her first day at work in her new job, and she has to pick the right outfit. She has to do all the things. She has to learn the lingo. And we're learning so much before she even gets out the door. And she's on the subway and she runs into Milo Ventimiglia. And for a brief moment, they have this ridiculous subway exchange. If you don't remember, Milo Ventimiglia was this little guy she hooked up with last season.
His character name was Handsome Man. Which is now not his. Yeah.
Yeah, they would walk in the park together. He met Ethan a couple times. They hook up, and then all of a sudden it ends because some woman barges in and catches them in bed together. And so he has the whole explanation and this whole thing. And it leads me to believe, I have this idea that this man is not important. This man is not important, even though it's Milo Ventimiglia and we love him and we love the Gilmore Girls crossover. I believe that the men that are now going to be in Midge's life are either reasons, seasons, or lifetimes.
Ooh, say more about that, Erin.
So I feel like there's like a saying, people are a reason, like people come into your life for a reason.
I've never heard that before, so tell me.
Okay,
yeah.
So there's this saying someone told me a couple years ago that sometimes people come into your life for a reason, right? Like Wicked, right? Like, because I know you, I've been changed, right? And sometimes people come to you for a season. You're with them for a long period of time. There's growth that happens. There's something, they're with you for a minute. And then there's some people who are with you forever. An example of this, someone who's in Midge's life for a reason is Lenny Bruce. Someone who is here for a season, no pun intended, would be Benjamin, right? And someone who is with her for life is Joel, right? Like Joel is always going to be the co-parent. Joel is always going to be the reason she got into comedy. And through thick or thin, they are always going to be there for each other. And I think that Milo Ventimiglia is a reason only so that she has material for her stand-up bit. I don't think he's as important. I think that's it. I think there were a lot of reasons and seasons that kind of came building up to season 5. And now the people that we're focusing on, at least in these first 3 episodes, are truly the lifetime people. And maybe even Gordon Ford being like a reason or a season. I'm not sure he's a lifetime person yet, but we'll see. Yeah.
We will wait and see.
Also, she finally goes to work and realizes, wow, writing on a show sucks. And which I also think is like a joke just for anyone in a writer's room. I think that's a fun little shout out to them, especially since they are now like striking, probably.
Yeah. So timely, Erin. The thing about this thing about the 1960s, it like is so timely for today. Anyway, I think also it's interesting, when you talked about that she got this job, really Susie got her this job. When Gordon Ford wouldn't hire her as a stand-up, she said, hire her as a writer. And then when he agreed and she told Midge is like, I'm not a writer. I don't want to be a writer. And there were a couple of like, no one wants to be a writer jokes in there, which, of course, everyone appreciates. But I think it wasn't something that she chose. It was something that Susie saw an opportunity in and hooked her up with, which is important to note how committed Susie is to Midge. Even while her business is growing, she does seem to spend most of her time trying to hustle for Midge.
Yes.
And part of that is like dealing with Mike, who is the booker on the show or the executive producer. What is he?
Producer. He's basically, he should be the executive producer because he does all the work, but then he doesn't. And Mike owes Susie because Susie got Jane Lynch's character on the Gordon Ford show, either in season 3 or season 4, as a way to like get her comeback. And that episode was so successful that it boosted Gordon Ford's ratings. So Mike hates that he owes Susie something. And that also plays really funny in these episodes. But I was like, this guy looks really familiar. What do I know him? Where is Mike from? Oh yeah, boy. He's Rachel Brosnahan's real life husband. How fun is that?
Yeah, his name is Jason Ralph. And for those of you who watched The Magicians, he played the lead in that series. And it was a really great and entertaining series that has a musical episode. So, Erin, if you haven't seen it, you should see it.
I will. But we meet Gordon Ford in these 2 episodes. And he's like one of those like dreamy but annoying characters. I don't know how I feel about Gordon Ford yet.
Well, if you have seen Reed Scott in anything, you should know that when he shows up, he's going to be this kind of handsome-ish, charismatic-ish, charming-ish jerk.
Yep.
The jerk part doesn't get the ish because it's just, he can be such a jerk.
Because it's like people love him and respect him and they also hate him. And I'm like, I don't like that. Like, I don't know. I can't tell if just like all the writers are envious of him or he just appears lovely. And then I don't trust him yet. I feel like he's going to piss off Midge, or Midge is going to piss him off, or I don't know.
You think he appears lovely? I would not say that.
He appears like when he walks through, like people find him charming. People like him. He respects some people to a degree. And then when the door closes, he's like annoying, and I don't like him yet.
Okay, that's fair.
Plus, in this second episode, they have beef. Not to be confused with the Netflix show, but Midge and Gordon go at it because someone thinks the joke is funny and someone doesn't. And like, it's really interesting watching people tell you your joke isn't funny because it's you. And it's like, no, the joke is funny because the joke is funny.
Susie really goes after Mike, like to try to get Midge on the show. Like that is one of the things that she is obsessed with and very focused on. She follows him and his family to a Christmas tree farm to try to convince him to put Midge on the show. And then she also goes to the studio and has a wordless fight with Mike, which is actually really impressive. Erin, I don't know how you watched this scene.
It's so good.
Yeah, I watched it first with the subtitles, but then that was too distracting with the audio and the subtitles and them mouthlessly wording at each other. So then I got rid of the subtitles, and the audio was still distracting. So I watched it with the sound off and no subtitles to see how good it was. And you should really try that because it's really an impressive work of making yourself known without using any words. It's really pretty impressive. So that's my little plug for going back and hitting the mute button, but also just watching these two actors go at it because it's really terrific.
Yes. And I do think, I don't want to spoil all of the episodes. So I do want to move into episode 3, where we do get another time jump. And this time we do see adult Ethan living in Israel.
Of course.
The only thing I'll say about this is that he seems really happy and peaceful being a farmer in Israel. And it is very different from his life on the Upper West Side of New York. And so we find out he's engaged, and this woman is nothing like Midge, and yet she's exactly like Midge. She's strong-willed. She knows what she wants. She's hardworking, and she loves Ethan, and she has a funny way of showing it. Like, it does sound like Midge. And I just really love seeing how these first 3 episodes cut from the future of the children and what the children are doing in present time. And Ethan is having a really hard time adjusting. His parents are separated. They have really odd jobs. Their grandparents are crazy. They're kind of being moved all over. And like, Ethan has like issues being grounded. And we'll find out, how messed up, quote unquote, Ethan is. But Midge is trying to like give him something to ground him. And so the fact that he ends up in Israel as a farmer working with his hands, it just feels like that's where he had to go to get grounded. All right. Send him all the way over there.
Connecting to the ground, like literally.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And only 12 hours away flying.
So 12. Yeah. At that point, it was probably longer. I don't know how air travel works. I try not to think too hard about it. But so I wanted to say a little bit more about Israel. It wouldn't be me if I didn't talk about Israel, but I talked about the Hebrew and talk about what happens during this scene. So I just want to say very briefly that when we transition to Israel in the opening of this episode, we also hear a 1984 song by Israeli legend Ofer Chaza, and it's called Sur Manoti. And the song is from a Yemenite poem, which I believe is in Hebrew and Arabic. So some of it if you know Hebrew, you'll hear it. Sur means rock. And so, it's from a Yemenite poem by Rabbi Shalom Shabazi. And the lyrics in English are translated this way: Rock of my existence, you are the object of my desire, and of all that I have, you are my claim to holiness. And we'll stick a video clip link in the show notes for you to look at in case you want to hear the entirety of the song. It's not great in terms of music video quality, but you'll get the idea. Also, Ethan has an exchange with a fellow kibbutznik. I don't know, field worker. I don't know what you would call him, because it's not clear what Ethan's really doing there either. Like, is he on a kibbutz? Is he in a year abroad program? I don't know what the story is. I'll ask some more questions about that in a minute. But the guy says, Yofi shel yibul hayom, meaning beautiful heart is today. And I looked it up, and I think it should probably be yivul and not yibul, but that I'm not going to nitpick about that, she said, while she nitpicked about that. And then Ethan responds, Elohim he beat lemata v'chayech. God looked down and smiled. I also, if they were asking me, this is not an actual quote from anything, I would have said, Elohim he beat aleinu v'chayech alenu. Something like, it's talking about, oh, it must be because of God, where it's said that it's a little awkward is my point. And then when a helicopter lands and the marvelous Mrs. Maisel steps out of the helicopter and everybody kind of freaks out because, helicopters don't come to this part of Israel, apparently. He says, Zeraki Mashali, it's only my mother. He ba'a levaker New York. She came to visit from New York, which is all technically right, but his accent is terrible, which led me to wonder, how much Hebrew does he actually know? Did he learn any? Did he go to synagogue with his family? And what I really want are the missing years where Ethan discovers Israel, becomes interested in Judaism. We learn that he's in rabbinical school, which she calls rabbi school, which reminds me of priest school, if you remember that crazy ex-girlfriend thing. But he says it's not called rabbi school, but what is it called? Where is he? What kind of program is this? What's the balance on this farm or, plot situation where there Israelis and non-Israelis? And if they're all Americans, then why are they speaking English? And where in Israel is this? Oi, with the poodles, I have so many questions.
Yeah. And it's weird because I feel like when he's happy and at peace, we kind of get to learn a little bit more about him. And then the second the helicopter comes in, it's not about him anymore. It's about Midge. So all those holes feel right because it doesn't matter anymore. It matters why she's here, why she's visiting, and what does he need to get through to her immediately. So I like the dynamic shift too, where we don't get that information because Midge doesn't care or she already knows. And so it's not important for us to know, which is also very fascinating. It's okay, it's literally Midge's world and we're living in it.
Yeah, it's true. We only see what she sees most of the time. And when we get these little glimpses into her kids' lives, when she's not there, in some ways, even when she's not there, she's there. So it's very much an expression, the impact that parents have on us. And, that we feel one way when they're in the room, but even if they're not in the room, we may still feel that when we think about them or what they expect from us. So I think it's a really interesting way to play with that.
And I want to say something about this episode more thematically, instead of just getting into the nitty-gritty. I really love how no matter what, Midge is unapologetically herself. And I think this is a generational thing. Because I was talking to my dad, who I love very much, and he mentioned that he was frustrated that Midge can't just shut up. She just can't, she can't help herself. And then she always screws herself. And he was just I want her to win. But I just want her to sometimes she goes too far and then everything implodes on herself. And I thought about this and yes, it's true. Sometimes a lot of the times she messes up and she makes a big mistake and she regrets it and she gets set back to the beginning. And I realized that this is a double standard because I don't think anyone has ever told my dad or men in general, this is very generally broad strokes. I don't know how often are men told to be quiet. Let's generalize about men for a minute. How often are men told to be quiet, to play it safe, to not speak out of turn and speak their mind? I don't know if that happens as often as women are told this. And just in my own experience, I've been told to be quiet, to wait my turn. It's not my time, to shh, or to say you're embarrassing. All these things. I have been told these things through various moments of my life. And also my dad raised a young Mrs. Maisel, a very loud, outspoken, chatterbox extroverted kid who like always spoke her mind and was told not to like not take, shit from anybody.
I
So
didn't
like
know you
I
had
think
a sister.
ha ha ha. So but like isn't that interesting that like he looks at Midge and gets frustrated, and then at the same time like he's raising someone who is trying to be very similar. And like, it never, like, and I love my dad. And I know my dad was speaking more so on like, he wants to see her win and doesn't want to keep seeing her lose and mess up. But I also think it's like, I find it so fascinating that like she keeps pushing through and she keeps on keeping on. And even when she falls, she pushes back, gets back up. And there's moments in this episode specifically where she, stands her ground, yells her big mouth, and she thinks there might be ramifications. And then it turns out that the exact opposite happens. And so to me, the lesson in these first 3 episodes are be bold, right? Like just keep being you. Like don't let anyone put you in a box.
Right. I think now that we have this new season, especially at the end when we will have all of the episodes in the season and we will know the entire story of Midge Maisel as presented to us by this show, we'll be able to go back and to look at the beginning episodes to see where this personality trait started. Because, obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about Abe and Rose as we move forward in this storyline in the season. But Rose and Abe are very traditional parents who raised 2 kids who in some ways were more traditional, in some ways less traditional. Their son, I forgot his name, Chaim's dad, he works for the CIA. That's not necessarily what nice Jewish boys generally end up working for. And I think wasn't there a storyline where he kept it secret from his parents until they figured it out, right? Wasn't that a thing?
Yes. It was an entire thing. And then when they found out, he was like, my kids are lying to me. Why are they lying to me? They still were like, they took it very personally.
Yeah, and Midge was sneaking out at night to play comedy clubs after she got, she was separated from Joel. And the reason she was separated from him was because he cheated on her. If he hadn't cheated on her, I don't know, would she have launched on this path? It's a question, and she and her brother Noah grew up in the same house, just like we have Esther and Ethan growing up in the same house. And the question of how the generations mirror each other and how much the people in each generation rebel against the previous generation. These are all like important questions and differ from family to family and in social environment to social environment. And obviously the generations are still working everything out today in terms of gender roles and like who is in charge of what and how we treat people based on their gender. And I think, I see a lot of these changes happening even in some of the conversations that you and I have had about some professional matters, where I'm probably a little more conservative and you're probably a little bit more, assertive. And so I think that, there has to be a balance. At least for me, this is the way I operate, is that there's a balance that, of course, I wouldn't say, shut up, don't talk, you're embarrassing. But I also would say that maybe, because different people have different ways of communicating, the way to get what you want or to have a desired outcome, if you're looking for something a little bit more neutral and less calculating, but to get a positive outcome, you might have to employ any one of varying communication styles to get what you want from a particular person, because some people appreciate confrontation and some people want to be in charge of moving that process forward. And there's that whole thing about getting more bees with honey, which doesn't make sense because bees produce honey, so you can't have honey without bees. But I think it's flies with honey. I'm not sure that flies like honey. Flies happen to like, I think, dead flesh is what I'm understanding. But anyway, the point is, we just went a little goth there for a minute. But I think that Midge has always been treated like a prize for how she looks and dresses. Mm-hmm. And when she feels low, she works it out on the stage. And that gives her the high that she needs and the courage to push forward.
100%. I think that's beautifully said. you see the different generations, because even Joel and Midge, as they're trying to help Ethan, Joel is very against, therapy or things like that, where you're like, oh, wow, look at generations later, how different generations work through parenting and being their own person, and how, people push forward and push back and all of these things. And it's just like, I love that in every episode, we just get all of it. Right. And then there are these like horrible little moments where you see Abe trying his best to be a good grandfather and then just completely like scaring the hell out of Ethan, to the point where all of that progress doesn't matter because now he's terrified and needs to sleep in bed with Midge. And it's like, well, everyone has their way, right? Like, it's just such a funny family psychology trip.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And it's no wonder that Abe doesn't want therapy or belief in therapy, because what therapists would do with this family is like probably a book length analysis. Just before we move on, I just want to say that one of the things that we're talking about here is the part where Abe tells Ethan that he shouldn't be afraid of his fear, because fear is good, and fear is something that protects you. And he ultimately, through a series of examples, unmoors Ethan's sense of stability by telling him that anything could happen to harm him or kill him at any time, including a plane crash in Park Slope. And he mentions this, and I did a little bit of a Googling about it. And this plane crash where two planes collided in midair, and then the debris as it fell to earth killed more people, is a real thing that happened in 1960. So it was definitely very much on Abe's mind when he was telling this story to Ethan. He was also telling him tigers can escape from zoos and things like that. Like, he was basically saying all of these things you can be afraid of, and giving him even more to be afraid of.
Essentially, it's face your fears, run with scissors.
That's right. Yeah, it's a terrible story. There's pictures in the Daily News in case you need to see those. They did an in memory of in December of 2022. So, yeah, that was kind of interesting to know that was a real thing. And so why don't you move us ahead now? We could talk about each of these episodes for a super long time, and we have already. So let's get it moving forward. We'll go forward as the first episode wanted us to.
By the time you viewers are listening, we will have all just seen episode 4, Susan. And it never occurred to me that Susan could be about Susie until watching this episode. In case you don't know, Susie was once Susan. And this episode is wonderful only if to showcase that Midge is not the center of the universe. And Susie had a life before Midge, and something brought her to the gaslight many years ago. And it's really lovely getting to watch Susie grow in so many ways and see what truly scares her and something that truly stops her in her tracks. Like, when someone she loves dies, you get a wonderful, real moment from her. When she watches Midge perform for the first time, you get a visceral reaction. And then we get a new form of emotion from her, which is heartbreak. And it's really fascinating to watch just the early moments of that unfold. And I hope we get to see more of that this season. It also is a big episode for Joel as well. And it feels like this is the moment where Joel becomes a lifetime for Midge. And I don't know what else is in store, but it's like something like we've turned a corner, we've turned a page. And now it's like, all right, Joel will be Midge's ride or die, whether or not they ever end up together again.
Right. I mean, we have that comment about how the 25-year partnership with Susie has maybe come to an end. We don't know the end, but at least that's what Mike Wallace says, fake Mike Wallace on fake 60 Minutes. I think the question is, we don't know what will happen with Joel. We don't know what will happen with Susie. Is there a thing looming in the future that might ruin what she has with Joel, or what she has reestablished with Joel after being betrayed by him in their marriage? Who is to say? I mean, we will be to say at the end of the series, but it does seem to indicate from this episode, like what you said, is that Joel is there for Midge always, and vice versa.
So far, I'm really pleased with this season. I feel like I'm just enjoying it. Like, I'm not trying to judge it as harshly as I have judged other seasons, only because I feel like I trust the process now. Like, I know this is the end and I just want to ride the ride, and I'll probably critique it more later. But something I noticed by going back to the pilot, all of the characters have really settled in to what they are. Like, the pilot obviously is so new, but like the accents are way thicker and more caricature-y, and they definitely mellow out as the show progresses. And it was so subtle, I didn't even realize it until going back to the beginning. And I was like, oh my God, they talked like that? That used to be like the way that they did it. So I encourage you throughout this process, listeners, to go back from the beginning and really see the growth that these characters have had that got them to this moment. Because I feel like it makes it that much more enjoyable.
Right. So what you're saying is in a world where the first episode is titled Go Forward, you're saying we should go back.
Go back.
That reminds me of Say Anything. That was a scene in Say Anything. The most important thing is to say go back. Yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's also because, well, it's funny because like in the beginning, like they don't even have episode titles. It literally is called the pilot. Like, we've just come so far.
It's like, Erin, I feel like you're getting a lot of nachas from this. You're like, they've come so far. In the background, I kind of hear like sunrise, sunset happening. Like,
maybe.
Is this the Maisel that I carried?
Like in the next couple of weeks, something could happen. And I'm like, what are they thinking? What are they doing? But so far, I trust the process.
Good. That's important.
So let us know what you think. If you're watching, please tell us what you love, what you hate, what your predictions are.
And if you're a medical professional, please tell us what is wrong with Midge after the snowstorm. What could possibly be wrong with her? If you are a mental health professional, please diagnose her children for us. We want to know.
We really do. And let's go into our speed round.
That's right. So we've got a couple more things for you this week that have nothing to do with The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, because this is a world in which that can happen too. So there's a 2023 horror film called The Offering, which you may have seen advertised in various spaces. But the reason we're telling you about it is because it's inspired by Jewish folklore, and it's about a Hasidic family who's under attack by an ancient demon. Oh, demons.
We love to see it.
Yes. And it's now available on Hulu. So if that's the kind of thing that floats your horror film boat, you can check that out. I may be skipping it because horror films are not my thing.
Yep.
Erin, do you think you're going to see it?
Hard pass. But I will pass it along to my friends who are big horror people, and I will get the notes from them.
Right. Okay, sounds good. Please report if there's anything relevant to our podcast.
Copy that.
Or if it's an enjoyable movie. We like to know about that too. Mm-hmm. Also, Peacock, which is, some of you may know, is a streamer that is founded by NBC, dropped a trailer for a new scripted autobiographical comedy series called Bupkis, which, Erin, do you know what Bupkis means?
I think I've heard.
So it's a Yiddish word meaning like beans or, nothing, basically.
Mm-hmm.
None.
Mm-hmm.
And it's from Saturday Night Live veteran Pete Davidson. And, the actor, comedian plays a fictionalized version of himself in the show. And Edie Falco and Joe Pesci are his mother and grandfather, respectively. There's a lot of guest stars. There's only one guest star who's Jewish, and that's our friend Jon Stewart. Pete Davidson co-created the series with his King of Staten Island collaborator, Judah Miller, and also wrote some episodes. And, why are we telling you about this? Because of the Yiddish in the title, obviously, and our search for Jewish content in this. And it's important to remember that Pete Davidson's father, who died on 9/11 because he was a firefighter, that's one of his famous origin stories. And his father was predominantly of Jewish ancestry with some distant German, Irish, and Italian roots. So there might be some, residual Yiddish or Jewy things that come up during this show. So we've got our eye on it, and we'll let you know if anything substantial emerges. There's one more thing I wanted to share, which I thought was just an amazing technology story, especially since the week that we are recording this is Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day. There is a website called From Numbers to Names, which identifies people in Holocaust-era photos using artificial intelligence. It compares those photos with photos in archives at Yad Vashem in Israel and at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And it was founded by a Google software engineer, and it's really a remarkable opportunity to match people whose faces were previously unknown, their names were previously unknown, with the faces that are in these photographs. And
wow. It's
a really incredible story. There's a great story in the J about it by Alex Wall, and it's really impressive. We're going to put that link in the show notes, and you should all read it. Basically, it involves a person uploading a photo to the website, and then the website searches the available archives of Holocaust photos for potential matches. And they don't identify the person with any certainty. They come up with a bunch of matches, and then it needs to be verified with human eyes. So they're really trying to find as many of those identifications as they can now, because the people who can identify them are dwindling through the process of aging and dying. Okay, well, I don't want to end this podcast with the word dying, so we'll just say that this is an opportunity for, and Erin has something that she wants to add, but the idea of trying to reestablish an additional layer of memory for people who were only known as photos for now is a real mitzvah and a real gift of the technological era.
Absolutely. And I know we said we were done with Maisel, but in case you are still waiting for new episodes to arrive and you want some more Maisel-y content, I 10 out of 10 recommend Alex Borstein's Corsets and Clown Suits on Prime Video. I've been watching pieces at a time just because life is busy, and she is so funny. It's so great and interesting and different, and you go see it. Go watch it.
Marvelous. I can't
wait.
It's
on Amazon
It's on
Prime
my queue.
Video.
Of course. Let's do all of the Maisel descendants at one time. Let's just
Yes.
Yes. All right.
And that's it, I think.
Yep, that's it. Erin, thank you for taking this journey with me today.
Always. I'm happy to see you.
All right. Till next time.
This has been The Bagel Report, a production of J, the Jewish News of Northern California, and a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network. Thank you to Lev Gringaz, our producer from Jew Folk Inc., David A.M. Walensky and Andrew Essenston, and Danny Lipsky for creating our logo. You can find us wherever podcasts are listened to. Connect with us on social, on Twitter, at Esther K, at Eben Moshe, and at The Bagel Report, on Instagram at Esther Kostanowitz, at Eben Moshe, and TBR the Pod, and by emailing us at thebagelreport@gmail.com. Now go and watch something interesting, and maybe we'll talk about it next time on The Bagel Report.